And you're an ethicist and a philosopher. Isn't one of the central arguments put forward by those that are pro-choice is that women have the moral capability to be able to make decisions about their own body and what's right for their children and their family, and ultimately they should be able to make that decision, not the state?
So that certainly has been at the forefront of this debate, both in the US and the UK. But what I would say is that most women, in both countries, think that there should be limits on abortion. They don't think that abortion should be allowed at any point in pregnancy. So in the UK, 70% of women think that our limit should be reduced from 24 weeks down. And in the US, the large majority of women think that the limit should be reduced from viability or from birth down to 12 weeks.
But that's not the moral argument. I mean, we know that polls, for example, in the UK show very strong, if not majority, support for the death penalty. But actually, we kind of recognise as a liberal free society that may not necessarily be the right option. Isn't this idea that because polls might show the majority of women support this, that's not the crux of why some women may need that particular procedure for their own personal reasons?
Well, it's not, and you're right that we shouldn't just decide everything by what the majority says. I completely agree with that. But what I would say is that the large majority of women have moral arguments and have moral reasons for thinking this. So, for example, the baby by 15 weeks, which is the limit proposed by Mississippi, babies at that point can feel pain. They can interact with their twins in the womb. They can taste food that the mother has eaten. They can hear music and move their mouths and tongues in response to it. And so I think it's clear by this point, the baby is a human being from a medical scientific perspective. And that's the moral argument, is that there has to be a limit in a way to protect both lives and to keep up with the scientific advancements, which over the last few decades have shown more and more the reality of life in the womb.
Okay, what about, though, in the cases of rape and incest? Because my understanding is that this current case over there at the moment would mean that you couldn't get an abortion if you were, even if you had both those things, even if you were raped by your own brother, for example, you wouldn't be able to abort that baby. I'll be on a certain time.
Sure, yeah, and obviously these are profoundly difficult cases where most people are going to suggest that there should be an exception and that abortion should be allowed in those cases. The first thing I would say is that those cases are extremely rare. They make up a tiny proportion of abortions, and that shouldn't be a reason to allow abortion for any reason into a very late stage of pregnancy. But of course, those women still deserve an answer and they deserve support. What I would say is that there's no evidence from a medical perspective, speaking as a medical doctor, there's no evidence that abortion is a way of healing women from that incredibly awful, horrific trauma that they've been through. And actually, women's testimonies, there's a very good book called Victims and Victors. Women's testimony when they have been through abortion after rape say generally that it didn't help them, whereas having the baby offered them an opportunity to heal. Now, I'm not minimizing the trauma.
You're speaking about some women. And so I think you've read a book and that has had some testimony and anecdotal evidence. But clearly, some women believe that it is something that is necessary for them. And I think, it's not just obviously cases of rape and incest and those horrendous things, but oftentimes it may be a mother that has, 3 children already and has made a decision for her family that she may not want, another child. Why do you want to take that right away from those women?
Well, I think the issue here is that all of us would say that there should be some limits on abortion. We would all say that abortion should not be allowed in the 3rd trimester, for example. And most of us would say that shouldn't be allowed even if the woman has been the subject of a horrific crime. We certainly wouldn't allow someone to take the life of a born child because they were the victim of a horrific crime, even while accepting that they have been the victim and they are, a victim of a profound injustice. And what that means is that we can't simply take away the rights of vulnerable human beings, the right to life, because of the circumstances in which they were conceived. If we believe in human equality, we have to believe in human equality for everyone, no matter how they were conceived. And so once you get to a particular point in pregnancy, if that really is a human being that can feel pain, and is able to taste, that is able to hear songs and try to sing back. This is a human being which deserves protection.
Roe v. Wade, well, the precedent was set, which was that actually it was up to the point where they can live independently, the fetus, on their own. So I don't think that it is that. I don't think it's necessarily the case that you're bringing. But in Mississippi specifically, they only have one abortion clinic, as I mentioned in the introduction, that now termed the Pink House. So if this is limited, it's not just even that it's going to be 15 weeks. There's one abortion clinic, so it's going to still be incredibly difficult for women, even those that have made the decision before 15 weeks, to still get that kind of procedure.
That might be true, but in a sense, that's already true. The case doesn't have an impact on that. Even before this case, there was only one abortion clinic in Mississippi, and that probably does make it more difficult for some people to access that clinic. But that is in part because of the democratic process in Mississippi, which has elected governments which have put restrictions on abortion clinics and which has not got a huge demand for abortion. In Mississippi, the abortion rate is very low by American standards. And so what we see, yes, it might well be that some women find it difficult to access abortion in Mississippi, but that is really a result of the democratic process in Mississippi, where most people are pro-life and most people do support restrictions on abortion.
Just very, very quickly, sorry, because I'm getting shouted at to move on here, which I'm sure you can understand. We've got a couple of other bits and bobs to crack on with. But look, if it's not too prying of me, as it were, can I ask your personal view? Are you someone who believes that the life exists from the moment of conception?
I came to my view at medical school, where I studied in Oxford, which taught us in the first year of medical school that life begins at conception. So this wasn't something that I came to as a sort of result of philosophizing. It was just a scientific fact, and it remains a scientific fact that life begins at conception. And so that's why I came to that view. And I haven't seen any scientific evidence to refute that.
No, absolutely. I just thought it was important just to add a bit of context, really, as well, just to know a bit about you as well, because I think if you made some fantastic points there, you put your case up very, very well. I think it's nice to get a picture of maybe some of the human elements behind it as well, even though obviously you came to that conclusion based off scientific evidence as well. But anyway, Dr. Calum, thank you very much. Dr. Calum Miller, ethicist, philosopher, and doctor at Oxford University.